This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Thursday, April 29th. Welcome to Africa 54. We continue to work remotely because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But what hasn't changed is our commitment to bringing you the latest and most important news from the African continent and around the world. This is today's Africa 54. Lawmakers in Botswana recently set up a committee to address a high and increasing rate of rape cases in the southern African country. They also plan to establish a sex offender registry. However, campaigners like rape survivor Refilwe Mooki say those actions don't go far enough. Mkondisi Dube reports from Gaborone.
Singer and activist Refilwe Mooki took self-defense lessons after she was raped in 2017. Last year, her emotional wound was reopened when her little sister was also attacked.
Just after my little sister was raped, and it took me back there, I felt like it's a curse or something, but at the same time, I'm like, let me do something positive out of this.
Mooki leads a Say No to Rape campaign in Botswana, where reported cases have soared in the last few years. Authorities note pandemic restrictions have increased gender-based violence, and this year announced a committee and sex offenders registry to address the problem. But activists say more than policies, they need action.
We've had inquiries in the past. There have been findings, but then there's never been implementation of those findings. And Botswana has signed and ratified some of the legal instruments, but they are not implementing. So that is the challenge that we're having as a country.
Botswana's rape survivors say police don't take their ordeal seriously, and cases often don't make it to court. To address those problems, authorities say they are piloting gender-based violence units at police stations and special courts to fast-track their cases.
Dedicated this song to prove you wrong.
That raises hope that the voices of survivors like Mooki could finally be heard. Mkondisi Dube for VOA News, Gaborone, Botswana.
An African woman, no means no, ain't gonna tell you twice. Ain't gonna tell you twice.
In West Africa, some Nigerian women are now acting to address the problem of sexual violence, saying that cases have ended in few prosecutions, widespread stigmatization, and a tendency to blame victims. Activists have launched centers to support women, an app to report attacks, and a push to protect girl victims from being traumatized again in the legal system. The 2018 official Nigeria Demographic and Health Survey found that 30% of girls and women aged between 15 and 49 reported suffering sexual abuse. The government has declared a state of national emergency over rape and gender-based violence and say they have directed the police and the states to do everything they can to tackle it. Dozens of villagers in Mali's Mopti region have allegedly been killed, detainees severely mistreated, and a dozen others disappeared under mysterious circumstances, according to Human Rights Watch. For more on this disturbing report, I spoke to Corinne Dufka, the SAHEL director at Human Rights Watch, and began by asking her who's responsible for the alleged killings and disappearances.
Well, since the transitional government took power last year, we've documented 50 killings and disappearances, specifically 34 killings, including summary executions, and 16 disappearances perpetrated by the Malian security forces. All of these abuses have been perpetrated within the context of counterterrorism operations or actions.
Is it also possible that these killings involving civilians began with the Tuareg separatist uprising in 2012?
Yes, indeed. Mali has continually deteriorated since 2012, when the northern half of the country fell to Tuareg separatists who were then joined briefly by armed Islamists linked to al-Qaeda. Since then, the insecurity has moved from northern Mali into central Mali and then further on into Burkina Faso as well.
Mali and other countries formed the so-called SAHEL 5, a multinational military force, to deal with these insurgents and radical Islamists. Has this mission been effective anyway?
Well, it's very interesting when one tracks the military assistance, military training, the operations involving foreign forces in Mali. They don't seem to have deterred the advancements of the armed Islamists who have spread from northern to central Mali and now into Burkina Faso and are, of course, threatening even other states further south like Cote d'Ivoire and Benin. So clearly something isn't working. We believe the abuses perpetrated by the Malian security forces and the Burkinabe security forces, for that matter, are pushing young, angry people into the Islamist ranks.
Your report talks about the killings, disappearances, so many other issues going on. Have you been able to interview any witnesses or families of those affected, and what are they telling you?
Absolutely. That is how Human Rights Watch does our work, is that we base our work based on firsthand eyewitnesses with victims' witnesses and their family. So we interviewed over 40 of them for this report, and every report we do is anchored in firsthand witness testimony, as well as interviews with community leaders and diplomats and others who try to contextualize the violence and the incidents that we've documented.
There are reports that Germany has announced plans to send up to 600 troops in Mali. How significant is this plan in helping combat the violence in that country?
Yes, there is the involvement of numerous foreign countries, obviously with MINUSMA, the peacekeeping mission, as well as France, Germany, who are key partners in the fight against the spread of terrorism in the Sahel, and as well, quite recently, of Operation Takuba, which is a force of crack special forces from a number of European countries.
At this point, would you characterize Mali's conflict as interfactional, government versus Islamists, or a combination of all of these factors?
It's really a combination of all of them, including ethnic militias. It's a very complicated military picture involving numerous armed groups, all of which have perpetrated very serious human rights violations.
What are your organization's recommendations?
Well, we are pushing the Malians to ensure discipline within their forces, to prevent reprisal attacks against communities, to ensure that the provost marshals who are mandated and responsible for ensuring discipline and ensuring the rights of detainees are present in all operations, and also to make some progress on accountability.
What do you expect to see now with the death of Chad's president, Idriss Déby? Chad being a key member of the Sahel 5, do you see this cooperation continuing, or what do you expect to see in the coming days?
Well, it's a very worrying recent development in Chad. Now we have two military transitional governments in Mali and in Chad. They are a key partner not only for G5 Sahel, but also the counterterrorism efforts in the Lake Chad Basin, which include Cameroon and Niger. So they're in a key strategic position, and they are now, facing significant insecurity and a very complicated political transition. So we're certainly very concerned about the implications and how abusive armed actors may take advantage of this insecurity, and this could contribute to a deterioration in security in this area, this vulnerable area of Africa.
What's the overall impact on the civilian population?
Civilians have suffered tremendously in Mali and indeed in Burkina Faso, in this entire region. There are several million displaced and refugees. There has been a hunger crisis. Access to education has dramatically decreased. I mean, the impact on the civilians is really markedly deteriorated in recent years, as well as for governments to step up their efforts to protect civilians.
Corinne Dufka is the Sahel Director at Human Rights Watch. In his first address to the joint session of Congress Wednesday night, President Joe Biden pitched his ambitious infrastructure and jobs plan while casting government as a force for good. The American presidential tradition was noticeably different in many ways due to COVID-19 protocols. VOA White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara reports.
Madam Speaker, the President of the United States.
It still has pageantry, but due to the pandemic, President Joe Biden's address to the joint session of Congress was attended by only 200 people instead of the usual 1,600. His main message to the American people that democracy and government can still deliver.
We're vaccinating the nation. We're creating hundreds of thousands of new jobs. We're delivering real results to people. They can see it, feel it in their own lives. Opening doors of opportunity, guaranteeing some more fairness and justice.
Biden pitched his $1.8 trillion American Families Plan to expand education and child care, financed partly through taxing wealthy Americans. That's on top of the $2.3 trillion infrastructure package he announced in March.
The American Jobs Plan is a blue-collar blueprint to build America.
Biden delivered his speech later than most presidents, not only because he wanted to prioritize the country's massive vaccination campaign, but also due to security concerns. Just 4 months ago, supporters of then-President Donald Trump stormed Congress to try to overturn Biden's victory.
The worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War.
Now Biden is pitching his agenda to all Americans, including Trump supporters.
He was packaging his policies as patriotic competitiveness. Who could be against that? Packaging his infrastructure bill as the American Jobs Plan and talking repeatedly about jobs. Again, who could be against those types of things?
Biden renewed his call for gun legislation and, amid a surge of migrants at the border, urged Congress to pass his immigration bill. On foreign policy, Biden highlighted troop withdrawal from Afghanistan, the nuclear threat from North Korea and Iran, and pushing back against Russian aggression. He warned that Chinese President Xi Jinping is deadly earnest about turning China into the most consequential nation in the world, and that adversaries are betting on the polarization in American society.
They look at the images of the mob that assaulted the Capitol as proof that the sun is setting on American democracy.
First Lady Jill Biden did not bring guests to highlight the president's agenda, as is the norm. Instead, she hosted them virtually, including an immigrant nurse, a gun control advocate, and a transgender teen. Tim Scott, the only black Republican senator, delivered his party's rebuttal, playing down Biden's pandemic efforts.
Thanks to Operation Warp Speed and the Trump administration, our country is flooded with safe and effective vaccines.
For the first time, 2 women flanked an American president during his address to Congress, Vice President Kamala Harris and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, second and third in line of succession, respectively, marking a historical milestone in U.S. politics. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News.
U.S. President Joe Biden has pledged to put human rights at the center of U.S. foreign policy. Human rights leaders have welcomed strong statements from the new administration, but say action must follow. VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Nderitu has our report.
Harsh crackdowns on peaceful protests in Myanmar, Russia, and other places around the world tested the Biden administration's promise to make human rights a cornerstone of American foreign policy.
President Biden is committed to putting human rights back at the center of American foreign policy. And that's a commitment that I and the entire Department of State take very seriously.
Some human rights experts say President Joe Biden and Secretary of State Antony Blinken have struck a markedly different tone on human rights compared to the Trump administration, citing what they say is sharper criticism of China's treatment of its ethnic Uyghur minority.
The Biden administration has made this unequivocally clear that the Chinese government's treatments of the Uyghurs is egregious and that the U.S. government will not turn a blind eye. So that is about as radical a departure on China human rights as we've seen. I think under the prior administration, there was not nearly enough attention given to human rights abuses, whether it's in the Xinjiang region or in Hong Kong.
Other experts also note the administration's global focus on human rights.
We saw sanctions on the International Criminal Court lifted. We saw the global gag rule for women's rights lifted. We've seen a lot of support for LGBT people around the world, support for civil society, and certainly human rights has been mentioned quite often, especially by Secretary of State Tony Blinken.
But citing the Middle East, Holowinski and other experts say there is still room for improvement.
There have also been some missteps. So things that are very practical and not just statements include arms sales to United Arab Emirates and to Egypt, two known rights-abusing nations. So we still have a long way to go.
Experts say while a shift in tone is important, the real challenge will be how the Biden administration attempts to make nations like Russia or China pay for human rights abuses.
Having Secretary of State Tony Blinken say that what's happening to the Uyghurs in China is a genocide is one thing. Trying to impose a cost on China for those actions while also trying to get cooperation from China on climate and the pandemic and other issues is another matter.
With the COVID-19 death toll surging in India and other nations, human rights experts say providing critical help is another major rights issue. They are calling on the U.S. and other richer nations to waive intellectual property rights to allow greater access to life-saving vaccines. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
We'd like to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. Our address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, a Zimbabwean sculptor gets inspiration from COVID-19. We'll be right back.
Hello, welcome to Straight Talk Africa, live from the Voice of America headquarters here in Washington. I am Shaka Sali. Straight Talk Africa, we call it like it is. We discuss issues that reflect the interests of our audience without fear or favor. We are guided by facts, and I look at myself as a servant of nothing but the truth.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Kenyan farmers say they are being forced to hand pollinate their crops due to a decline in bee populations from pesticides. Kenya's insect experts say the chemicals meant to kill desert locusts and other pests are killing off bees and other pollinating bugs. Victoria Munga reports from Nairobi.
Kenyan farmer Samuel Nderitu made a good living from his crops for nearly a decade until 2019 when he noticed neighboring farmers spraying for pests. His crop yields started dropping, says Nderitu, and is convinced it's because the pesticides killed off pollinating insects like bees. He has since been forced to hand pollinate the plants.
It has been quite successful. Not 100% though, because that is not natural. The natural way is where the insects transfer the pollen from one place to another. That's the most successful one. But now, because the pollinators are not there, we have to help in that process.
A 2019 desert locust invasion in East Africa forced Kenyan authorities and farmers into a massive spraying campaign to save their crops. But Kenya's International Center for Insect Physiology and Ecology says the unchecked use of pesticides is ironically killing off the pollinators that the crops depend on.
The pesticides are affecting the health of the bees because the pesticides reduce the immunity of the bees, now aggravating the effect of pesticides in the varroa mites, and those lack of forage because of climatic conditions and change in climate. All these, they reduce the immunity of the bees and can even eventually cause the bee death and decline in populations.
Kenya's agricultural experts are researching pest control options that reduce chemical use. Biological control using predators that feed on pests is one option.
The biggest challenge is that biological control works in situ, in ex situ. Ex situ means in the lab. It works very well. But when you take it to the field, because of rain, because of other environmental issues, sometimes it's not quite as perfect.
Biodiversity groups are also training Kenya's farmers on how to repel pests without harmful chemicals that can kill pollinators.
We train them on what we call integrated pest management. For example, if you find that you have a particular pest that is giving you trouble or a disease, how do you plant crops? For example, if you, even in your kitchen garden, if you have growing vegetables, we encourage farmers to grow them with things like onions, pepper or pilipili, and these are able to repel some of these pests.
You rub the pollen here like this.
Kenyan farmers like Nderitu hope to one day attract bees back to their farms. Until then, he will have to do the pollinators' work by his own hand. Victoria Amunga for VOA News, Nairobi.
In Southern Africa, Zimbabwean sculptor David Ngwerume is gaining attention for works inspired by the pandemic. Ngwerume's latest piece is called Michael Jackson, named after the late U.S. pop icon who was well known for wearing masks and a glove. Columbus Mavunga reports from Harare.
The 40-year-old Zimbabwean sculptor David Ngwerume now has what he calls COVID-19 coloring. His exhibit called Arms encourages people to take the COVID-19 jab to help the country reach its vaccination target of 60% by the end of the year. Another one called We Are Torn encourages people to sneeze into their elbows. And the most talked one encourages people to mask up in an exhibit called MJ, named after the late U.S. pop icon Michael Jackson, known for wearing masks and gloves.
Now, I'm using his figure around this COVID pandemic on my art to show that Michael Jackson gave us a warning that mask up. And his figure shows a finger pointing out to us as a people, saying, mask up.
Ngwerume has posted his pieces online to keep people from coming to his studio and potentially spreading the coronavirus. Art dealer Shingirai Mafara says he wants to hold an art exhibition to display Ngwerume's work for a wider reach.
So I find these pieces very, very pivotal in terms of not just putting back Zimbabwean art sculpture on the map, because we're definitely back on the map, but also setting awareness to the entire world. Let's get vaccinated. Let's wear masks. Let's social distance. Let's hold hands and try to get through this together.
Ngwerume's work has also caught the attention of officials in Zimbabwe. Artists like him, the country's art council representative says, are thinking outside the box.
The situation has taught our artists to be resilient, taught them to be imaginative and to be creative in terms of sustenance and how do you make a livelihood in such an environment which is not easy to operate when sources of income, creating money or making money has been closed totally.
Ngwerume hopes to work with art auctioneers and use part of the proceeds to get personal protective equipment or PPEs for Zimbabwe's health workers. Zimbabwe's doctors and nurses have struggled due to lack of adequate resources while working in the front lines of prevention and treatment during the coronavirus pandemic. Columbus Mavunga for VOA News, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Different races and religions sharing space is part of America's melting pot ethos. Indonesian American Christians and Muslims in Philadelphia are doing just that. VOA's Alam Brohanan has more in this report narrated by Nova Pawadi.
As religious minorities in Indonesia, Indonesian American Christians in Philadelphia wanted to extend a helping hand to Muslims, a religious minority in America.
Being a minority is not comfortable.
And I've been experienced that back home in Indonesia.
In 2007, the Philadelphia Praise Center opened its space for local Indonesian Muslims who didn't have their own mosque at that time.
Kami waktu itu tidak punya masjid.
That was in the holy month of Ramadan. We got very confused because we did not have a mosque for Eid prayers.
So all congregants were here. So all my Muslim friends were here. They took off their shoes or sandals and put them on the stairs. And we broke our fasting together in the basement.
The Indonesian diaspora in Philadelphia numbers around 7,000 people, based on data from the Indonesian consulate in New York. Many of them, mostly Christians, migrated here after the 1998 race riots in Indonesia.
Saya dulu S2 di sini, mungkin 15.
When I was studying for my master's degree here, at that time, I could not meet a single Indonesian. And when I moved here in late 2007, there were thousands of Indonesians.
But the goodwill gesture came with some challenges. Muslims, for instance, were uncomfortable worshipping in a space with a giant cross and statues of the Virgin Mary.
But at that time, during the Tarawih prayer, we covered up the cross.
Some Christians took offense at covering the cross.
The response from Indonesian Christian, as well the American Christian, that they were my friends, and they show that they're not agree with my decision, with our decision.
In 2008, Indonesian Muslims in Philadelphia founded their own mosque, Al-Falah. But in gratitude for the solidarity shown in the previous year, the mosque has since invited Christian Indonesians for the traditional breaking of the fast at sundown.
We say, we give greetings at Eid al-Fitr. They say Merry Christmas to us. I know that's a big controversy back in Indonesia. It's not a big controversy here because we respect to each other.
The annual International Religious Freedoms reports to Congress routinely paint a problematic picture of the treatment of religious minorities in Indonesia. But here in Philadelphia, where both Christians and Muslims have lived or are living the minority experience, both sides continue to live a more harmonious existence. For VOA's Alam Burhanan, I'm Nova Purwadi, VOA.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.